Plenary.
Sorry, I was doing something else. So that was the looking at regional and global data. We had a couple of little connection problems with the moderator, but apart from
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this plenary, which will focus today on the role of teachers in advancing transformative education. My name is Christophe Cornu. I work in the section of health and education at UNESCO headquarters, and my section coordinates UNESCO's activities to promote the health and well-being of children and young people in and through education. And today I will moderate this session together with Antonia Wolf, who is the Director of Policy, Advocacy and Research at Education International. So I'm going to start with a few words about the objectives of the session and how it will be structured, and then I will hand over to Antonia. So what do we want to achieve with this session? Well, we all know that teachers play a central role in transformative education. However, we also know that they need to be prepared and supported to play this role. So the first objective of the session will be to share global evidence on the role of teachers and the support they need in delivering transformative education by presenting the key findings of two global studies that were conducted recently by UNESCO and also by Education International for one of them. And then the second objective will be to discuss with key stakeholders from various regions and countries what can be done to support teachers to effectively facilitate the type of transformations needed to promote and advance sustainable development, global citizenship, and health and well-being. So now, how will the session be structured? Well, the session will start with the presentations of the two global studies I just mentioned. This will be followed by two panel discussions with representatives of key stakeholders, and we'll have some time after the panel discussions to take some of your questions. And the session will conclude with a last round of comments by all our panelists. So now let me hand over to Antonia, who will say a few words of welcome. Over to you, Antonia.
Thanks so much, Christophe, and welcome to you all. It's a pleasure to be here, and let me start by saying a couple of words about Education International, which is the Global Union Federation of teachers and other education employees, representing 32 million teachers and education support personnel in about 178 countries and territories. And we're so pleased to be here with you today because we are going to look at two surveys that will really be key contributions looking at the role of teachers for transformative education. And what I really want to stress here is that these two reports build on surveys. So they are really based on the reflections, the analyses, the needs of teachers, those on the ground who are the ones making transformative education possible. From our point of view, of course, listening to teachers, listening to those on the ground is the first step for evidence-based as well as sustainable policy. It's the only way that we can put in place the structures, the support, the tools that are needed to really make transformative education possible. So we, of course, hope that these two reports are going to mark a new beginning in a way for policies that support and maybe even enable transformative education. Back over to you, Christophe.
Thank you, Antonia. So just before we hear these two very interesting, very interesting presentations about the findings, just let me give you a bit of information on logistics. As you may know, the session is simultaneously translated into 4 languages: English, French, Spanish, and Korean. So you can select the language you prefer by clicking on the button for each language at the top of the screen. Something also very important, for your questions, you can use the chat box. And so for questions, comments, it's right next to the live streaming screen on the platform. And you can do so during the presentations, during the panel discussions. The summary of the discussion will be shared after the session through the discussion board, which is also embedded on the meeting platform. And also please note that the session is recorded. So if you have colleagues who are not able to be with us now, you can let them know that they can watch this session later on. So without further delay, we'll now listen to the two presentations Antonia and I referred to, and I will introduce our two speakers. Our first speaker is Professor William Gaudelli, and he's the Dean of the College of Education and Vice Provost for Innovation in Education at Lehigh University in the USA. He was previously a professor of social studies at Teachers College at Columbia University. And his research areas include global citizenship education, teacher education, and development. He has published many articles and books, including a book which is titled Global Citizenship Education, Everyday Transcendence. And this book offers an analysis of global citizenship education globally. And you can find his full biography on the conference platform. And so today, Professor Gaudelli will present the key findings of the global survey Antonia just mentioned on teachers' readiness to teach about education for sustainable development and global citizenship education. This study was conducted by UNESCO and by Education International earlier this year. Our second speaker, I will introduce him now because we will listen to the two presentations without interruption. So our second speaker will be Professor Carmel Sefai. He's a professor at the Department of Psychology in the Faculty for Social Well-Being at the University of Malta. And he's the director of the Center for Resilience and Social Emotional Health based in the same university. He's also the honorary chair of the European Network for Social and Emotional Competence and a founding editor of the International Journal of Emotional Education. And today, Professor Sefai will present the key findings from another UNESCO survey or study conducted last year, focusing on what teachers think about violence and bullying in schools and what they do to prevent and address it. So we'll now listen to these two presentations. Professor Gaudelli will speak live. Professor Sefai has pre-recorded his presentation, but he's with us. So if there are questions for him later on, he will be able to respond to your questions. So now, please, Professor Gaudelli, the floor is yours for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Christophe, and thank you, Antonio, for your warm welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of us as global participants. Wonderful to see us all here together, gathered to talk about these important findings. I will share with you that one piece of my biography that's not noted that I want to underscore is that I spent 10 years as a classroom teacher doing global studies and area studies with students. And those were very formative years for me when I was reading this study and the results. It very much resonated with what Antonio was saying, in that you have to really look at the experience of the people who are doing the work, engaged in the work with students, understand best how these things manifest in the world. And so I've always taken that orientation. I think this study does a great job of looking at it from the perspective of the students, rather the teachers who are engaged in this work. So a special thanks to UNESCO, to Education International. Also a special shout out to my colleagues at PPMI in Lithuania, Kristavas and Islan, who are with us today as well, who worked with me and others on developing this report, and with UNESCO and with EI. And so we really appreciate all of your efforts as well. So I'm going to be sharing with you the findings of this global study, the title of it being the Global Survey on the Readiness of Teachers to Teach ESD and GCED. Next slide, please. So the objectives of the study, why the study? So the inclusion of target 4.7 as an SDG 4 in 2015 has shown that there is a global consensus around the need for teaching quality education, education that is holistic, Education that's not solely focused on workforce development, but is also focused on social development and the development of young people towards those ends. In the years since the adoption of the SDGs, very few data have been available to monitor the progress of 4.7. ESD and GSED cover various topics and dimensions of learning, including cognitive, social, emotional, and behavioral. The extent to which they are mainstreamed adequately in education systems is therefore not easily measured and not fully known. To complement the official statistical monitoring of Target 4.7, UNESCO and Education International partnered in the design, the development, and implementation of the survey for teachers on the extent to which they're ready to deliver education for sustainable development and global citizenship education. In particular, this study focused on how teachers are motivated and interested in teaching ESD and GSED. Do they have the skills needed to teach ESD and GSED? Is the appropriate training and education available to them to these ends? Do they have access to suitable teaching resources and materials to do this work? To what extent are they supported by schools, teachers, and the local community in doing this work? And we believe the study is the first large-scale study to attempt to capture teachers' perceptions of their own readiness to engage in these important thematic elements. No other study has sought to track teachers' readiness in terms of motivation, skill, and opportunities to engage ESD and GSED effectively and to instill and develop this knowledge in skills and values and attitudes in young people to build just and peaceful societies through the individual, collective, and local actions and global actions as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. The methodology of the study, or how was it done? UNESCO and Education International launched an online survey from March to April 2021, targeting primary and secondary teachers worldwide. More than 58,000 teachers from 144 countries responded. 61% were female and 69% had more than 10 years of teaching experience. A technical expert group was established in 2020 to oversee the development of the survey and the analysis of the results, and we relied heavily on them for the interpretations of the data. To facilitate a more accurate and detailed measurement of teachers' perceptions and practices in ESD and GSED, the study focused on the extent to which teachers are ready to teach 4 thematic areas that we identified. They included climate change, sustainable consumption and production, human rights, including gender equality, and cultural diversity and tolerance. Though these topics do not cover the full range of issues addressed through ESD and GSED, they focus on some of the more pressing issues facing the world, typically addressed in the context of this curriculum. Next slide, please. Limitations of the study. We beg caution in terms of generalization, mainly because this is a self-selected sample. And therefore, there is a pre-existing interest, we would assume, among those who participate in the study. And secondly, that there was a different response rate by regions. And we also went through some statistical work to weight this representation differently and survey responses differently as a result of that overweighting in some cases. Next slide, please. The conceptual framework is really built on the idea that there are motivations, there are skills, and there are opportunities in order to learn and engage students in learning for GSED and ESD. So this is a sort of foundation of the work, is what are the skills, what are the most motivations, and what are the engagement opportunities to do this kind of work. And we therefore, we present the survey findings in relationship to those areas. Next slide. So the first question, are teachers motivated and aware? Next slide. You'll see here the results of the global survey as we've summarized show that teachers are generally aware and generally committed to teaching ESD and GSED themes. Awareness of the importance and urgency of teaching ESD and GSED increases with age and experience in the profession of teaching. Male teachers are slightly more likely to report feeling confident and capable in explaining all 4 themes in relation to cognitive, social, emotional, and behavioral learning dimensions. Female teachers are slightly more likely to indicate the most knowledge areas and skills are very important to integrate into teaching, but are slightly less confident than men in doing so. However, care should be taken in analyzing this finding, such that high confidence levels do not necessarily result in strong performance or ineffective teaching. However, of the 4 themes studied, teachers report being most ready to teach cultural diversity and tolerance and human rights than they do climate change. They feel significantly less well-informed and confident about teaching sustainable consumption and production, and it is the least commonly taught theme among those we surveyed. Next slide, please. Teachers understand the importance of the cognitive, behavioral, and social emotional learning dimensions across all 4 themes. And I think this is a super important point. The 20th century was very focused on cognition alone. And we have to recognize that we're all more whole beings than thinking beings. We're feeling beings and we're social beings. And we recognize that through this work, and we see that teachers are very much on board with that. And certainly, you know, as someone who spent a lot of time in the classrooms, you see that on a regular basis. They feel more confident, however, teaching the cognitive skills and less confident and knowledgeable about the behavioral learnings and about the social emotional perspectives that are presented in this work. This finding confirms an earlier finding by a UNESCO study conducted in 2019, Educational Content Up Close, and you can find the full detail on that study at the library. Next slide, please. There is a discrepancy between teachers' self-reported desire to learn more about ESD and GSED and their actual participation in learning opportunities. And so this is a bit discordant in the data. The survey indicates that teachers have an appetite for learning more about these topics, one that is generally not being met. But it is surprising to know also they acknowledge that such opportunities are largely available to them. So the discrepancy between teachers' self-reported desire to learn more and their participation in learning opportunities may indicate that teachers did not have access to professional development in the past, but now it is becoming more available to them. Or it may also show that professional development in ESD and GSED is available, but teachers have not yet taken advantage of that opportunity. Again, we're collecting data during the period of the pandemic, and so that may have refracted in the data as well. If the latter is true, and that is teachers not yet taking advantage of it, then other factors may be at play, such as costs, access, or lack of time or incentives to engage in this professional development work, such that they may confound teachers' interest in pursuing professional development on these topics. Teachers would notably like greater opportunities to develop curriculum materials to teach these topics as well. Next slide, please. Do teachers have the skill to teach ESD and GSED topics? Next slide. Half of the respondents faced challenges in teaching each of the 4 themes. The most common reason was not being familiar with suitable pedagogies. The second reason is related to school closures during the COVID pandemic, since between 24 and 27% of respondents indicated that the pedagogical approaches they would likely use to teach ESD and GSED were not feasible in an online or distance context. We, however, noted variations between topics. For example, nearly 24% of respondents indicated they do not have the necessary knowledge and skills to teach sustainable consumption and production within the classroom, compared with 13% for cultural diversity and tolerance. So there's some slight differences in variation between the topic areas. Next slide, please. Assessment of ESD and GSED is difficult for teachers. They acknowledge this throughout the study. Nearly 40% of respondents face significant challenge in assessing students' ability to act in accord with ESD and GSED principles. More than 1/3 of respondents do not have tools or guidelines for assessing interdisciplinary topics. In the face of these challenges, teachers are going to move beyond the traditional assessments in working in these topic areas. Teachers are making use of non-traditional assessments to bridge that gap. Interestingly, traditional assessment methods are least often used in ESD and GSED. Next slide, please. Teacher training, teacher identification, they identified human rights and cultural awareness, discrimination, and related injustices in these areas in which they had the most learning opportunities. Our study shows this pattern is similar in pre and in-service teacher education as well. However, 42% of teachers reported no professional education related to corporate social responsibility, either in initial teacher education or continuing professional development. This suggests that student teachers are taught about sustainability from a personal rather than a systems perspective, focusing on individual consumption rather than global goods distribution, the nature of supply chains, and the international trade and subsidization of waste in pricing, The findings echo research that has found a tension between global education aimed at assisting individuals in competing in the job market towards one that increases learners' capacity to be full citizens in a global society. Next slide, please. Last, do teachers have the opportunity to deliver ESD and GSED? Next slide, please. Teachers say that the lack of curriculum coverage of these topics is most profound at the systems level barrier to teaching these topics. Respondents perceive GSED themes to be better incorporated in curricular areas than ESD themes are. However, 1 in 5 respondents reported that ESD related topics are covered only to a small degree. This gap echoes comparative studies that find that 89% of countries cover GSED themes in their educational policies, compared with 51% that cover ESD themes in their policies. The next most frequently challenging piece was the lack of priority within national assessment, which is in most countries highly dependent on the curriculum. So the absence of assessment on ESD and GSED then translates into less attention in curriculum. Teachers said they faced this barrier due to time constraints as well, and they reported the main reason was the overcrowding of curricula within their priority fields. Next slide, please. At the school level, the most frequently reported barrier is the lack of relevant equipment and tools. Interestingly, the resistance to teaching the topic due to its controversial nature was least frequently reported by teachers. Next slide, please. Opportunities. Other studies have shown that student participation in school elections and having a democratic student body that participates in decision-making helps to prepare young people to participate in society as active citizens when they are adults. Indeed, delivering ESD and GSED must include opportunities for student engagement. This survey therefore asked students what they thought of the issue, and interestingly, the survey shows that teachers believe students do not have sufficient opportunity to act around ESD and GSED in their context. Teachers reported rather that students actively engage in volunteering activities, suggesting that students have capacity to act as change agents at the school level, but students have little say in school policies or issues concerning their well-being and interest. More than 1/3 of respondents reported a lack of student representation bodies in their school to enact this kind of democratic ethos. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, of course, the study points to the need for more research into local context and understanding those local contexts and the way in which education is enacted there. However, we know that teachers adopt context-specific approaches to teaching this work. This means that whatever policies are in place, teachers must play a role in the de facto application in the classroom. As such, they must be empowered and enabled to teach ESD and GSED effectively. I wanted to call out a few of these actions that the committee points to in particular as being especially resonant. One, considering ESD and GSED as core components of what constitutes a quality education. Number 4, providing high quality professional development and teacher education opportunities in ESD and GSED. Number 5, providing training and tools to support teachers in assessing students on ESD and GSED. Number 8, creating a supportive school environment for engaging this work. It really does take a village to do this work. It's not a lone wolf task. And then lastly, number 10, to ensure active participation in students in determining policies and practice of ESD and GSED is crucial. The next slide, please. On that, I think I'm out of time, and I thank you all for your attention. Good morning and good day.
Thank you so much, Professor Gaudelli. I mean, I was not involved in the team who managed this survey. I learned a lot. This is really, really great. And now we're going to listen to the second presentation, and which is about another component of transformative education. Now we're going to focus on health and well-being, and especially school violence. And we're going to see whether the findings from this other survey echo what we just listened to. So we're going to listen now to the presentation by Professor Sefai.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am Carmel Shefai from the University of Malta. And I'm presenting also on behalf of my colleagues from the Public Policy and Management Institute in Vilnius, Lithuania, Islandės and Rimantas. This study looked at how teachers perceive school violence and explored their role in preventing and addressing it. What they do to create safe learning environments, also in relation to target 4.8.2 of Sustainable Development Goal number 4, and what supportive factors and barriers exist, especially those relating to training needs. The report provided recommendations aimed at reducing school violence and creating safe learning environments across the globe. The study explored both peer violence between students and violence perpetrated by teachers, but this presentation focuses only on the role of teachers in preventing and addressing peer violence in schools. Let's have a look at the objectives and methodology of this study. Sorry. Okay, so we had two main objectives: to find out first practices, what teachers do or don't do to prevent and address violence in schools, and also the needs. What are the needs of teachers to prevent and address violence, and whether they have the necessary skills and support to act effectively, and what training and support do they need. In terms of methodology, it was informed by a literature review of the in the field, and also two methods of data collection. We had a global online survey and focus group discussions, which complemented the survey in 4 countries. For these presentations, we are going to focus only on the findings from the global online survey. We had 34,877 teachers from 147 countries and territories across the globe. You can see the pictures here. Also on the right, we have 70% female, 30% male, and there's a good spread of the age groups, most of it being between 20 to 60. The survey outreach approach, which was used, was based on non-probability sampling and snowballing. This ensured that we had a large number of responses in a short time. However, the survey outcomes do not represent the general opinion of teachers, either globally or regionally. In fact, we had significantly higher number of responses, as you can see in this slide, from South and Central America, 81% of the responses, particularly from Ecuador. So when interpreting the aggregated survey results, it must be borne in mind that responses from this region, very Central and South America, shape the percentages. Although during our interpretive analysis, we also tried where possible to differentiate between these two groups, the Central and South American group and the other regions. Okay, let's have a look at now at the findings. First, we'll look at what teachers do to prevent and respond to violence in schools. So when we asked what do they do to prevent school violence, many teachers said that they teach about topics that are important for the prevention of school violence. It is positive that over half of the teachers, so ranging from 52 to 71, teach students about tolerance, diversity, children's rights, recognizing unsafe situations, and abusive relationships. Responses from regions other than Central and South America show a smaller proportion of teachers engaging in such behavior. However, if we look at the lower down this slide, less than half of the teachers, so we're talking about ranging from 36 to 49%, teach about how social norms on gender, ethnicity, religious beliefs influence behavior, and also on keeping safe from online harassment. Now we know that online harassment and bullying is on the increase. So this is an area for intervention. And also in terms of social norms, we also know that many times bullying is not an individual issue. It represents a larger, broader issue relating to interpersonal relationships between groups, for example. Okay, so when we asked what teachers do and whether they are able to identify vulnerable students to school violence, almost all said that they take steps to identify students who are vulnerable to school violence through observations and interactions with the students. However, fewer than 1/3 of the teachers are aware that some students are more vulnerable to school violence according to existing evidence, such as younger boys and girls, students with disability, gender non-conforming students who do not conform with norms related, for example, to masculinity and femininity, students from migrant and ethnic backgrounds, and students perceived holding different religious beliefs. In this way, lack of awareness may be putting these students, making these students even more vulnerable to potential violence and bullying. Right, then we asked more specifically what strategies they used with victims, perpetrators, and bystanders. Let's start with the victims. As we can see here, most teachers seek to help victims in various ways. The most common strategies here are common classroom discussions, interacting with parents, and teaching students how to avoid violence. However, only 1/3 of the respondents talk with victims or mediate between victim and perpetrator, while even less than 1/3 refer victims to professional services or involve peer support. This is quite a concerning findings here, because we know that victims, most of the time, they need psychological support because they are at risk of mental health issues, both in the short term and the long term. Sorry, in relation to supporting, excuse me, other students supporting the victim, this is also keeping important finding to keep in mind, that the role of the bystanders and other peers is getting more importance in supporting the victim. So clear are these two areas for further intervention. Okay, what do teachers do with perpetrators of bullying? So teachers portray a rather positive picture of what they do with perpetrators. And we are talking 2/3 of participants from Central and South America, and 1/2 of those from other regions report using the disciplinary procedures at the school, classroom discussions, and meeting with the parents. A smaller proportion, but still a significant minority of them, say they teach and discuss with them, the perpetrators, how to regulate their emotions and behavior, ask them to apologize to the victim, or refer them to other sources of help. These findings suggest that more work needs to be done in schools, especially by teachers here, to help the perpetrators change their behaviors so that they would not keep perpetrating. Finally, very few respondents say they punish the perpetrators verbally or physically. Right, in terms of bystanders, most of the teachers seem to attach less importance to the role of bystanders. For example, only about half of the respondents engage with students who witness violence in schools. Most commonly, strategies are discussed with the whole class, the role of bystanders, and having private conversations with bystanders. I think this finding, there are no geographical differences in this finding. This is here, there is a clear target for intervention in view of the emerging evidence on the important role of bystanders in witnessing bullying. First of all, because they themselves could suffer psychological harm as a result of being exposed to violence. Secondly, on the other hand, they may become desensitized to violence and therefore become more likely to tolerate or engage in violence themselves. Thirdly, we know that bystanders are an important source of prevention of bullying. For example, not to provide active or passive support to the perpetrator who might be seeking popularity with peers. While finally, we also know that bystanders are an important source of support for the victims. Right, so the second set of questions was, are teachers equipped to prevent violence and respond to it? Let's see what they said. So 4 in 5, most teachers say, yes, it is their responsibility to create a self-learning environment. However, about 20% overall do not see this as other responsibility. Okay, so this is quite an interesting finding here. And in other regions, it goes up to 25%. And then we asked the teachers, do teachers think they have the skills to address violence between students in their schools? Most teachers believe that they do have the skills to address violence between students, but less so in stopping violence immediately when it occurs. And we know this is a very important key intervention to prevent harm from being perpetrated. The vast majority, 4 in 5 teachers overall, and 3 in 4 in regions other than Central and South America, say they are able to address violence between students by referring to school rules and regulations, offering support to victims, providing guidance to bystanders, discussing with parents involved in bullying, of students involved in bullying, and correcting students' behavior without hurting them. Okay. As we said, however, only 1/2 feel able to react immediately to stop violence between students. So clearly an area for intervention. In terms of adequate training, how most teachers say that they did not receive adequate training to prevent and address school violence, both in their initial teacher education, in their training, and also in service training. For example, only 1 in 3 teachers in Central and South America, and 2 in 5 in other regions reported receiving sufficient training, while almost 1/2 said they received little or no training. Younger teachers, which is a little bit more worrying, this reflecting maybe current practices, and the teachers of tomorrow, are most likely to report insufficient training. In service training, on the right, it's the similar situations, only 1 in 2 says that they receive professional development at the school and they have opportunities for professional development, while over 2 in 3 says that they have learned this through experience. We know that this is a longer way, okay, and may not be the most effective. Do teachers think they receive adequate support, okay, and that violence in schools impacts their practice and well-being? Yes, most teachers, 3 in 5, say that violence in the classroom affects their teaching practice, their motivation, and their job satisfaction. On the other hand, only 1/2 of the teachers say that they have the full support of school management to address violence, including bullying. So the main conclusion from this study in terms of this part of the study, teachers' views about peer violence, is that teachers need better training and support to address gaps in their ability to identify, prevent, and address school violence. More specifically, many teachers do not use comprehensive range of strategies to prevent and respond to bullying. Younger teachers are less likely to report teaching comprehensively about various topics helpful for school violence prevention. Many teachers do not stop violence immediately, and almost 1/2 of the teachers feel they are not fully trained and supported to prevent violence and respond to it. Younger teachers are less likely to report being well trained and confident. Here, clearly another indication for intervention. I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, Professor Sefai, for this presentation. I think that we can already get some lessons learned from the two surveys in terms of common findings, for example, in relation to training. But we're going to look at this now, and we're going to zoom. We heard the results from two global surveys. So now we're going to have our two panel discussions, and we're going to zoom on the situation of a few countries. And we're going to look at what happens in these countries, talking to representatives from ministries of education, but also teacher trainers, youth representatives. And we're going to start with our first panel discussion. And I'm very pleased to introduce our three panelists for this panel discussion. So we have with us Mr. Anil Ramdewar. He's the Director of Secondary Education from the Ministry of Education in a beautiful country, Mauritius. Then we have another representative from Ministry of Education. This is Mr. Supap Kunviksai. He's the Director of Research and Executive Briefing in the Office of the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education and Sports in Lao People's Democratic Republic. I know it's also a beautiful country, but I've never been there. And then finally, we have a researcher with us. It's Professor Miri Yemini. She's a professor in the Department of Educational Policy and Administration in the School of Education at Tel Aviv University in another beautiful country, Israel. And she holds the UNESCO Chair in Technology and Internationalization in Education in the same university. And she's a recognized expert in the field of global citizenship education. So I'm going to ask our three panelists a couple of questions. And I would like to start with the two representatives from the education sector, from ministries of education, people who are policymakers. So we heard from the two global surveys about skills, about training, about opportunities. So my first question would be for Mr. Ramdewar in Mauritius. Could you tell us to what extent in Mauritius teachers have the knowledge and skills and also motivation, because we saw it's something important to teach education for sustainable development and global citizenship education, and also to ensure safe learning environments. So Mr. Ramdewar, please tell us about the situation in your country.
Thank you, Christophe. Good afternoon to everybody. The expose, the presentation by Professor Gaudeli and Sefai were enlightening. The findings on ESD and GCED tend to resonate to some extent to our context. Currently, we do not have any specific studies conducted in teachers' knowledge, skills, motivation, and attitudes to ESD and GSET. However, my expose will address the Mauritian context with respect to ESD and GSET. Secondly, it will also highlight some major observations made with respect to teachers' knowledge, skills, motivation, and attitudes to ESD and GSET. The Republic of Mauritius has a population of 1.3 million people, multi-ethnic groups, Indian, African, Chinese, and European descent. The government is committed to provide a conducive environment while promoting intercultural understanding among its citizens and maintaining peace and harmony in the Republic. Under the PMO's Prime Minister's Office, there is a Department for Strategic Policy Planning Development Department, which ensures policy integrations of the SDGs at all levels in the country. And the vision of the Minister of Education of Mauritius is to create the next generation of forward-looking and innovative leaders contributing to the transformation of the Republic of Mauritius into a high-ranking and prosperous nation. Thus, our education system has constantly been influenced and shaped by national priorities and policies. It is also aligned with UNESCO and other international policies For instance, our policy document for education, the National Curriculum Frameworks, pre-primary, primary, secondary, are grounded on UNESCO Sustainable Development Goal 4, SDG 4, that seeks to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. The Mauritius Institute of Education, which is the higher education institution for teacher education, provides teacher education programs that covers various concepts of ESD and GSET. It is noteworthy that both teacher trainees and school students are assessed to some extent on different aspects of ESD and GSET. The Minister of Education also provides the necessary infrastructure and facilities to support the smooth running of teaching and learning activities at school, and at the same time has developed some policy documents to ensure a safe and non-violent learning environment for all learners, such as a student behavior policy and a school management manual, which are official documents available in all schools and teachers can have access to. And these documents, they also brief and about violence, dealing with school violence and bullying, and training has been done by the MIE for the school managers, inspectors, teachers, as well as the educational psychologists who support the teachers at school. We have a National Counseling Educational Service at the ministry, which provides facilities, logistics, support to the school management.
You have 1 minute left to wrap up, please.
As for the teacher's knowledge and skills with regards to ESD concepts are concerned, both pre-service and in-service teachers undergo specific teacher education programs, whereby they are well equipped with appropriate knowledge and skills for the ESD and GC concepts such as cultural diversity, tolerance, peace, nonviolence, human rights, and gender equality. And we have modules, core modules, as well as elective modules on environmental education, education for sustainable development, learning for sustainability, citizenship education, human rights education. Teachers are being empowered on ESD and GSET through regular, specific, continuous professional programs. Many teachers also engage in outreach projects such as Eco School, Omnicane project, and the Globe, which is an international project. Assessment of teachers, classroom observation, and school visit by quality assurance officers have shown that these concepts are being done in a satisfactory manner in classrooms, and they align and adapt the lessons as per the national curriculum framework and the syllabus which has to be covered.
Okay, I will have to stop you because we have the 3 other panelists, with 2 other panelists, and we each one of us has 5 minutes to speak. So we heard that definitely there is training in service, pre-service training, you have policies, you have materials, you have assessment. So that's something really important. So now we're going to move to Lao, and I have more or less the same question for you, Mr. Kunvitsai. So what is the situation in Lao in terms also of skills, knowledge, motivation of teachers to teach ESD and GCD, and also to ensure safe learning environments? Please, over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Sawadee from Laos. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Supap Kunvisai from Ministry of Education and Sport, Laos People's Democratic Republic. First of all, I would like to thank both the presentation are very insightful and comprehensive to reflect about the global study. There are some components of key activity of Lao PDR have implemented in the line of the Ministry of Education and Sport, suggest the Ministry of Education have set up the steering committee on disaster risk reduction and climate change, and integrating on the concept of climate change and sustainability into the curricula and extracurricular, such as supplementary teaching learning material, and running the pilot project on school safety. The teacher at the target school have been trained on the school safety that include the school physical building safety, school disaster risk reduction, management plan, and the building the capacity of school personnel and students, how to handle with such a consequence of the climate change, and how to mitigate those effects. The project considered including the prevention, preparedness, contingency plan, response, and recovery plan in such a scenario. And after this forum, I have learned that we have left something behind as a violence in school. So we will introduce this concept in those projects after this. And also recently, Lao PDR has joined the regional learning assessment. We call the Southeast Asia Primary Learning Metric in 2019, together with the Cambodia, Myanmar, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. This is a learning assessment for grade 5 students and questionnaire for teacher perception on global citizenship was also included in the program. The results show large majority of the teachers are confident on teaching, especially on environmental protection, children's rights, and sustainable development in the area of the global citizenship education. However, less than 60% of teachers are confident in teaching globalization. And more than 90% of teachers agree with other languages spoken in the country and understanding people that have a different ethnicity or race are important area of children global citizenship learning school. This race was highest amongst this country. However, we recognize that the in-service teachers throughout the country still need to train on this topic and how to translate those those concepts into activity, into school activity. Based on our experience, recently we have a project supported by UNESCO Bangkok. We found that in order to stimulate ESG and global citizenship education, the partnership and cooperation with the sector from different stakeholders such as CSO, private sector, local authority, and local community through formal, non-formal, and informal education and involving intergenerational activity. For the long-term manner, introducing those concepts into the teacher training college and institute might be a pathway for sustainable future.
We'll have to end here because you already used your 5 minutes. That was very interesting to hear the findings from the survey you conducted on like confidence of teachers, how they translate this into school activities. So now we're going to listen to our third panelists. So here it's a different story because Professor Yemini, you are a researcher and you have been conducting numerous comparative studies. So what is your analysis of the situation, also in relation to what we heard from the two surveys we found out about during the presentations? Over to you, please.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you for inviting me. Greetings to everyone. So the situation indeed is multidimensional, I would say. I would like to speak about ESD and GCD, which is the field of my expertise. And I would like to mention two very important concepts for me. One is diversity, and the second one is context. And I would like to elaborate a little bit on each of them. As far as diversity concerns, all global surveys that we saw as the one that was published just now by UNESCO and Education International, and other surveys on similar subjects like the global competencies by OECD or other more local surveys, they all look at teachers as one sort of a type of professional. And we can see in research that actually the nuances here are great and so important. For example, in a study when we looked into how teachers perceive teaching global citizenship education in schools of lower and higher socioeconomic status, we could spot significant differences on what teachers believe is relevant for their students. So going back to asking whether teachers are ready to teach ESD and GCED, we need to think perhaps also of what they think is relevant for their students. And for example, in our study, surprisingly, we found out that teachers in higher socioeconomically located schools, more privileged schools, felt that global citizenship education is less relevant for their students, since their students believe and act and behave more globally oriented than the teachers themselves. On the other hand, in low socioeconomic schools, the teachers also believe that global citizenship education and environmental education is not relevant for the students because they were busy with other urgent problems like violence and like feeding the students and getting the curriculum ready. And only the middle class teachers that they teach in middle class schools felt that these topics are very relevant for them. So if we want to think what should be done, obviously formal curriculum top down would be very beneficial in these issues when the teachers have sort of autonomy in terms of what to decide what is relevant and what is less relevant. And I believe that a high level of autonomy should be combined with a direct and very straightforward curriculum and technical assistance in order to get teachers to really be able to deliver these topics. As for the context, I would like to say a few words. We saw in our studies that some communities, especially those who are more isolated, perhaps more religious, located in the geographical periphery, they would pick up and choose certain topics that are very important in global citizenship education and environmental and sustainable development, but they would never pick up all of them. Therefore, as curricular developers and as Ministry of Education, we need to think what might be relevant for these communities and how we can really deliver these messages, where some of them perhaps not really compatible with what communities need and want. Therefore, we will be able to deliver some content and some ideas, but not all of them, when the alternative is that we will provide sort of full sealed curriculum, but none of it will be implemented. And as ministries and international organizations, we really need to think carefully about this. That's all from me. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, this the relationship, what your analysis about what is taught and the local context. I mean, it's not something I had been thinking about. So now I just want to thank our three panelists. We will hear from them a bit later, but we're going to move to the second panel discussion, which will be facilitated by Antonia, and we're going to hear now different perspectives. So Antonia, please, over to you.
Thanks so much, Christoph, and to the first round of panelists too. So we're going to shift gears and go from the broader country perspectives into a more specific teacher point of view. And we're going to start in Mexico. And I'm turning to Mr. Renato Jimenez Cabrero, who has more than 35 years of teaching experience. But today, we are most interested in your experience as a teacher trainer. And what we would like to hear is really your reflections on your efforts to make sure that teachers are sufficiently prepared when it comes to preventing and more broadly supporting the prevention of violence in schools. Please, you have the floor and it's 5 minutes.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos. Es un gran placer reencontrarme con todos los de la mesa.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be able to join you today. So yes, we want to support the teachers, and to be able to do so, we need to underscore the importance of perception and awareness. At the same time, we highlight the importance of responsibility and accountability at the individual and at the school level. And also, we want to connect everything to the social life. So we have to make sure that we provide a non-violent environment to the students. So teachers need to look at the situation and the scene and provide an interpretation of what's happening. And this is shown at in the UNESCO survey outcomes as well. And whatever happens between male students is more visible than female students, because male students are more outgoing. And also, we must be able to, so teachers must be able to read between the lines. So we have this 4R, and they need to be able to know of the reparation, reconciliation, reconstruction, and relationship. So the 4Rs are key to the teachers. And they need to be able to grasp what's happening to make sure that the cycle of violation ends. And to that end, teachers provide education to the students. So when it comes to the violent situations, sometimes violation is violence is never planned. So we must understand that sometimes violence is the result of a chronic situation. So the teachers must be able to address the problems, and well, teachers must be able to prevent and to anticipate the impulsive behaviors of the students. And to that end, what we do is to look at the different scenarios of violence of students, and teachers must be trained of the different scenarios to be able to prevent violence better. So anticipation and prevention must be connected, and this can lead to ending violence. And that's the cycle that we want to aim. That's a process that we want to aim. So prevention is something that teachers must have as skills. And also when it comes to the language that teachers use and the body language of the students, their gaze, and the reason behind their anger is something that the teachers must be able to grasp and read in advance. Also, teamwork between teachers is important, and they must also have dialogues with one another so that they have conversation to help students heal and to communicate. And we provide education to provide and create such an environment. We believe that training for teachers is the fundamental element to prevent violence in schools, and this element of training and education for teachers is something not only the means but also the end as well. So we want to create a mutually trusting environment, and that is the goal of our educational system. And the sense of ethics and morality is also something that should be incorporated to teachers' training. And I did not have enough time to cover everything, but thank you very much. That would be all for me.
That's wonderful. I'm bringing with me the 4 R's that you highlighted, and I also take note of your acknowledgement of gender roles and the role that they play in the classroom, also at the level of teacher training. So we're going to move now to the other side of the globe, to the Philippines, where we have Mr. Bert Tuga, who is the head of the National Center for Teacher Education. And looking at your experience, particularly in relation to global citizenship education, I'm wondering if you could reflect on the extent to which you think you are able to support those studying to become teachers and equip them with what they need to teach global citizenship as well. Please, you have the floor in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Antonia. In terms of teachers' readiness to effect or implement transformative education, specifically global citizenship education and education for sustainable development in our schools, we look at these preparations in 2 areas, pre-service teacher education and also the in-service teacher education program. But due to limited time given to me, I will focus my response on first on the available competencies and standards that we have set for our pre-service teacher education. And later, also I would like to share some of the initiatives that we had implemented in our universities. So as far as pre-service teacher education, our programs and standards and guidelines for our curriculum has actually included standards and competencies relevant to the implementation of transformative education, such as ESD and GSED. In fact, some of the program outcomes in across disciplines that are embedded in the standards and guidelines are demonstrating leadership skills that will help in teaching or training students who will empower their communities, integrating local and global perspectives in teaching the principle for the common good, show passion and commitment in becoming advocates for universal values of openness, peace, tolerance, social justice, and respect for human rights, and also manifest commitment to community service as a means to promote social values, and exhibiting critical mindedness in analyzing local, regional, national, and global trends to education. Examining our pre-service teacher education curriculum in the country, we have actually observed common courses or subjects under professional education component that aptly reflects ESD and GSED, such as the teacher and the community, the teaching profession, building and enhancing new literacies across the curriculum. And also, we have this mandatory course or subject in our teacher education curriculum called National Service Training Program, which is a service learning project, which is basically our opportunity or chance to integrate GSED and ESD in these mandatory courses. But in Philippine Normal University, aside from the minimum requirements set by the Ministry of Education, we have also integrated GSED, ESD, Indigenous Peoples Education, Environment and Green Technology Education, multicultural and peace education in our own teacher education curriculum using a whole school approach using a whole school approach model. In reflecting on the presentation of Dr. Gaudelli a while ago, I can say that in our experience as a teacher education institution, I think our teachers in the field, content-wise, they are actually ready implementing a transformative education or GSED and ESD. But I think the issue is about harmonizing the content with the effective learning of socio-emotional skills and also values and attitudes relevant to transformative education. And one of the steps that we did in coordination with the Ministry of Education and also with the UNESCO APCU, we have actually conducted a project called GSED Curriculum Development and Integration in the Philippines. And this project basically produced 3 important outputs that will help and guide our teachers in the field. The first one is on development of the framework for integration based on the Philippine context. Development of lesson exemplars integrating GSED and ESD across subjects and disciplines, and also providing video lessons for our teachers which they can use when they want to implement GSED and ESD in their courses or subjects. And in addition to this, we also provide in-service program and continuing professional development in the area of transformative education. Thank you, Antonia.
Thank you. Wonderful. And a great overview of some of the measures that can be put in place, and a good reminder about the whole school approach as well. So we're now going to move to a youth activist, but also someone who's a teacher and someone who's recently started teaching, which is another crucial dimension in this conversation, and a dimension that we probably don't think of or include enough in these conversations. So I'm turning to Ms. An Dong to really start by asking you about your experience starting your work as a teacher, and some of your reflections around the extent to which you felt sufficiently prepared and sufficiently supported.
Yes, thank you, Antonia. So hello everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. I'm from Vietnam, and I'm here as a representative of Global Partnership for Education, and to give my perspectives as a young person, a young activist, and also a young teacher. So to become a teacher in Vietnam, the requirement usually is to gaining a 4-year bachelor degree in education of a related subject. So after 4 years of learning and recently graduating, I feel quite confident to get into the job, but I didn't really realize that there's still a lot of things that I'm not really prepared for. The first one is that the first recommendation, I think, is that teachers training needs more hands-on practice that is relevant to their context. This is very important because as a young teacher, I remember that in my training, my teaching practicum was quite short. I only had in-classroom experience once during my 4 years of training in the senior year, and it was quite short. And also, I think that the training curriculum need to reflect the real-life circumstances that we will be teaching in. My training and materials assumed that I would have to teach in a class of 15 to 20 students, which is ideal, but public school in Vietnam, teachers usually have to deal with 40, even 50 students in one classroom. And that's definitely a situation that I was definitely not prepared for. And also I'm not really aware of the amount of the office work and all the reports that teachers have to do. The teacher training is all about teaching and learning the quality of teaching, but The training never taught us that the report can play such an important role in the teacher career, because many supervisors and principals in Vietnam assess the quality of teaching through the reports and the grade of the students. So that's something that's very different from what we're learning in the training program in the real school environment. And another thing I noticed is that the training curriculum for teachers, it could be more practical and less theoretical. For example, when we learn about psychology or developmental psychology, often in my training program, we had to memorize and then reiterate the knowledge and the theories in the books. It really had to remember by heart. And also it's very easy for us to forget. So it will be much better if we have the chance to learn about the common problems with students' well-being and how to have students to be mentally healthy. Things will be much better. So the training curricula, it can get more practical, so it can be more relevant to the teacher experience at school. And also the thing I want to say here is that in the last 2 years, with the impact of COVID, when COVID hit and we had to move to online teaching, in Vietnam, teachers didn't really have the training to know how to teach effectively when we are not in front of our students. So we had to learn as we went. In many educational institutions in Vietnam, even now, teachers didn't receive the necessary support with online platforms. So many of us teachers had to use a free and limited version platforms provided by Zoom or Teams, or use our own money to pay for the full versions. So that's the time that I feel that I'm really so unprepared for teaching, especially during this context, because that's the time when I don't know how to maintain the connection with the students when we always see each other in our technology devices and don't know how to have them in terms of mental well-being. So that's the view of my experience during COVID. Now it's getting much better because finally the education system, the government and the Ministry of Education have some training and also some help and support about the well-being of teachers. So that's getting better now. Yeah. But I believe that in the future, as a young profession, I think that the future teacher training must reflect the real situation at school, and also it should include teaching for social change and focus on SDGs, education for sustainable development, and global citizenship education. Because now we live in a global community facing global challenges such as climate change, poverty, and inequality. And teachers need to be trained on these matters so that students can be equipped and create solutions and know how to deal with these problems. So in Vietnam now, we don't really have available training in the areas, and it's also our our training curricula for teachers don't cover the matter. So I think that's a huge advantage and something that Vietnam has to work on in the future to make sure that our students can be global citizens.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anne. And I think you're posing questions that all of us will take with us around bridging that gap between theory and practice, finding a balance between the ideal scenario and the real scenario that teachers will be faced with as they enter the classroom. We are a bit behind schedule, and that means that the time that we had foreseen for questions and answers has really been eaten up already. So I'm wondering if we could call on our colleagues from UNESCO, if Lydia and Yongfeng would be able to briefly highlight maybe one question each, and that's something that the audience can take with them and that maybe the panelists could briefly reflect on as you do your concluding remarks. I'm hoping that would be an acceptable solution to all. Lydia, would you be able to start with providing one question?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. There's been many comments from participants, and one in particular that I think maybe could speak to everybody is the issue of the role of community and family integration here and what we've been discussing. To what extent the strengthening of structures and partnerships between schools and students, other environments, could provide support for teachers and help to promote broad and integrated school learning. That was a question from Ashley Emerton. Thank you.
Great. And Young Feng, do you have a question for us?
Yeah, there actually aren't many questions related to school violence and bullying. There's one question actually from Lydia. Who can intervene to stop violence immediately if not teachers? I just wonder if it's a question for our reflection only or for speakers to address. Over.
Great, thanks to you both, and back to you, Christoph.
Okay, yes. So because we are pressed by time, we're going to ask all our panelists to respond to one very last question. I mean, many of you have already provided with like very practical recommendations on what should be done to strengthen, to improve the support to teachers to promote transformative education. But we would like to hear, like, for you to conclude one, based on your experience, if you could think of one action that should be taken to improve support for teachers to deliver transformative education, what would be this action? So we have very little time, so we would ask you to, each one of you, just one action, again, based on your experience in your country. And we're going to start with Mr. Ramdewar in Mauritius. So one action, one recommendation based on the experience of Mauritius. What should be done to improve support for teachers to advance transformative education?
Thank you, Christoph. So for Mauritius, besides further capacity building of teachers on ESD and GSET by the MIE, which is the official training institute for teachers, and other departmental, ministerial departments, and the non-civil, the non-governmental organizations, the civil ones, which are doing works on themes related to ESD and GSET. The school should also provide a conducive environment and facilitate and support teachers' autonomy and leadership in the implementation.
Thank you.
Thus recognizing their contribution.
Yeah, something very important. So very conducive environment for teachers within the schools. So now, Mr. Kunviksai from Laos, what would be the action that you would recommend to support teachers to deliver better transformative education?
I think that from my point of view, reskill and upskill of the existing teacher is probably important during the COVID-19 because we see a lot of skill of teacher insufficient. For example, the technology content knowledge and psychosocial support, because we see that a lot of student learning through online platform. They also suffer from any kind of the emotional well-being. So I think that a psychosocial support is also important. And the most important skill for teacher in this moment, I think it is self-direct learning is one skill that every single teacher should have with their own. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So for you, psychosocial support. Professor Yemini, for you, what would be the action to improve to improve the support to teachers to deliver transformative education?
Right. So looking at the model that acknowledges as motivation, skills, and opportunities, I will put my money on motivation. I think teachers have so much agency within them to acquire skills and to get the opportunities, but the organizations and ministries of education need to provide teachers motivations, meaning autonomy on one hand and acknowledgement of the hard work that teachers perform every day to day in classrooms.
Thank you. So it's very much linked to what we heard from Mauritius, the focus on autonomy of teachers within this conducive environment provided by schools. Now, Mr. Renato Jimenez Cabrera, what would be the action that you would put forward to improve support to teachers? 2 sentences.
Apoyo completamente la idea.
Yes. Schools, comprehensive well-being should be promoted with the establishment of an independent body, and the parents should be engaged in the body for follow-ups.
Bert Tuga, for you, what would be this action that you would recommend to improve the support to teachers?
Thank you. Well, I agree with capacity building. I agree with motivation and mental health support. But mine is very simple. More time, give more time for our teachers to deliver instruction in the classroom, reduce administrative and ancillary tasks of our teachers.
Something very, very important that we heard also in other studies when we're working on school violence and bullying, more time for teachers to teach. That's something that's very practical, very simple, but very basic. And we're going to finish with Anne Zhong. So what would be the action that you would recommend to improve support for teachers to deliver transformative education?
Yes, for me, that teacher training must be hands-on and relevant. So that's very simple.
Teacher training, so that links to what we heard before, capacity building. So we had teacher training, capacity building, psychosocial support, mental support for mental health, motivation, enhancing the autonomy, acknowledging the role of teachers, monitoring committees, and more time for teachers to teach. So I think these are very, very practical takeaways from the session. So Antonia, we have exactly 3 minutes left. If you want to say something to conclude, and then I will provide some very practical information on the next session. And thank you to all the people who were involved in the session. But over to you, Antonia.
Thanks so much. What a wonderful session. It's been super energizing, actually, and I hope that's the feeling that you live with too. I hope these 2 studies will be used by you, will be useful as we advocate, as we hope to address some of the gaps, some of the obstacles that have been identified in these 2 studies. I think from my side, I would highlight training, both pre-service and in-service training as the very basis for transformative education. I'd zoom in on the support necessary for teachers to continue fighting for quality education, quality transformative education in the classroom, and knowing that they have the backing of a system, of their colleagues, of their school leaders. And I'd say a word about the necessity to involve teachers. So really looking at the reality they face in their respective classrooms and really having that as the basis when we plan some of the continuous professional development, for instance. Because at the end of the day, we talk a lot about individuals, but what we really need, if being serious about our commitment to transformative education, is really well-resourced, equitable public education systems that allow for teachers to enjoy teaching and for students to get all that they need to then go out in the world and make it a little bit better.
Thank you, Antonia.
Thanks to you all, and back to you, Christoph.
Yeah, so actually the transition is very easy for me. So now I have to announce what will come in the next session. So there will be 3 concurrent sessions, and they're very much linked to what we just discussed. The first concurrent session 3.1, will be about teacher preparedness. Concurrent session 3.2 will be about teaching and learning resources and materials. And concurrent session 3.3 will be about school and community support. So this is definitely very much linked to what we just heard. And these concurrent sessions are very different in terms of methodology, because you will have the opportunity to exchange in small groups on specific issues, and you will be able to formulate concrete recommendations. So we wish you a very productive exchange. Thank you very much for your participation, for your attention, and goodbye.